So to make bread, it's really simple. You don't need a whole lot of ingredients, especially sourdough. It's one of my favorite things to make. I've made it for about 2 years at this point. I haven't done anything super crazy with sourdough, I don't think. There has been a long period of time where I've just kind of gotten into the routine of doing a couple of things, so I don't even think about it at this point anymore. So I make bread and bagels a lot, and I make pizza dough, and so I kind of have like my staples. So I'm starting to get into that mode of wanting to be a little bit more creative, but I also want to share the basics with you guys because I think it can be helpful. So what you're gonna need is a mixing bowl. I use my KitchenAid stand mixer, which is like a second hand-me-down to us. So I'm not fancy by any means, but don't feel like you have to go out and buy a KitchenAid to bake. You don't. You can just use a good old mixing bowl and some elbow grease. So you need a mixing bowl, some active starter, some salt. I use extra virgin olive oil. You could also use like butter. I've done butter in the past, both work really well. And then I'm using unbleached bread flour. It's organic by King Arthur. So those are the things that you will need. Okay, so how I make this is using my kitchen scale. I guess maybe you need a kitchen scale too. I found this is the easier way to do it. There are recipes out there that do it in like cups and you don't have to use a scale. I find the scale to be the most simplistic way of using it just because then I don't have to use a million different measuring cups. So to me, this is just makes more sense. So I weigh my bowl, get the measurement, and then we're gonna add 150 grams of water. No, 250 grams. I always mess that up. 250 grams of water. So for example, my measuring bowl weighs 700 grams on the scale. So I need to get my measurement to 950. And I'm 5 grams off. Grams off, it's all right. I'm not perfect. If you want somebody who's gonna be like to the T with things that is not, I'm not your girl for that. So there's 150 grams of starter. So my scale says 952 right now. I'm gonna go to 1100 be my grams, but I'll just do a couple grams over just to account for the difference. And then you're gonna use 10 grams of salt. And then you're gonna add 20 to 25 grams of olive oil. Now I'm gonna add 500 grams of my bread flour, but hear me out. Okay, so if you just have all-purpose flour, that is perfectly fine to use. If you only have bread flour, that's fine. If you only have like whole wheat flour, that's fine. Use the flour you have on hand. Don't just throw everything away and okay, use what you have on hand. That's the best I start out with. Like, you know those like dollar flours that you get at Aldi's? Yes, that's what I started making bread with. I've changed up my bread just because I want better quality. And it's like a personal preference, but honestly, if you have just plain old or like plain old all-purpose flour, use with what you have. So you're gonna use 500 grams. This thing shut off again. It's because I'm talking too much. All right, so 658. Okay, once you got everything in your bowl, you're gonna mix it up and knead it, or you're gonna just throw it in the stand mixer and let it mix it up. Again, use with whatever you have. That's how we do things around this house. We just use what we have and do the best we can. Okay, so here's my lovely old trusty stand mixer that's mixing the dough, and it's also gonna knead it. So I leave that on there for a good 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, depending on if I forget it or not. But if you do not have a stand mixer, never fear, you don't need one. All right, folks, I decided to take this bad boy off the stand mixer to show you what it might look like if you were mixing this by hand. So my dough is pretty sticky right now. It's sticking to my fingers. So I'm just gonna sprinkle in a little bit more flour. You don't want your dough to be like super dry where it's like crumbly, because then that means there's not enough hydration in your dough. But you also don't want it to be sticking to your fingers where you can't work with it. You want to be able to roll and play with your dough without it sticking to your hand. So just kind of mess with it. It doesn't have to be a perfect. Just sprinkle a little bit of flour, or if it's crumbly, sprinkle a little bit of water until you kind of get more of like a softish Play-Doh consistency. And make sure whatever surface you're working on, you sprinkle with flour, because I've done that in the past and then I'm scraping dough off my counter. So once you've mixed for a few minutes and you've kneaded your dough, put in a little bit of elbow grease. I just like to form mine back into like a ball. And this puppy's gonna go back in the mixing bowl. And then I'm gonna cover it with a damp cloth or damp towel. And I'm gonna let it sit and I'm gonna let it rise. So the time it takes to rise will vary slightly. In the summer, it's not gonna take as long, so it'll probably take closer to 8-ish hours than it would. In the winter, it's probably gonna take closer to 12-ish hours, but it also depends on where you live and what the climate is. The warmer, just think of it this way. The warmer the climate, the shorter amount of time it's gonna take to rise. The colder the climate, the longer it's gonna take to rise. So I'm gonna let this guy sit for a little bit. I'll come back in about a half an hour or so, if I remember, to do a stretch and fold. This is more of like, I feel like this is more of an optional step to do. I don't feel like it's the end of the world if you don't do it, because there have been more times than not that I forget this step and my bread turns out great. So I'll come back in about a half an hour and stretch and fold. Well, I'm sure you're about as shocked as I am. I actually remembered that we need to fold the dough. Again, if this is a step that you skip or you forget about, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Your dough will be fine. Just fine. Okay, all right. Stretch and fold, all it basically means is I'm just gonna take my dough, scoot it under a little bit, stretch it up, fold it over, and then quarter turn, stretch it up, fold it over. You can do that all the way around. The reason I'm showing you is just because when I first read a recipe that said that, I was like, am I doing this right? So it kind of was a little bit of trial and error for me. So hopefully my clumsy way of showing you, you can see what I mean. And again, if it feels super sticky, put a little bit of flour on your hands and that will help. But anyway, once you do that, you can cover it back up and let it sit for a little bit longer.
We eat the healthy stuff.
Yeah, we do. It's time to make our bread that we've had sitting. So yesterday I let it rise for a little bit and then I stuck it in the fridge last night just so it wouldn't I'm gonna say poof, but it's proof. I don't know. Anyway, you don't want it to rise like too long. If you leave it out too long, then it won't like rise when you put it in the oven and it'll just be all flat and wah. So I'm just gonna shape it and
A bag.
I'm gonna shape the dough into our little like ball. I'm gonna use parchment paper in my Dutch oven. I don't have to, I just do so that way it doesn't like stick to it. And it's easier to pull out afterwards, so that way it can cool like on your countertop, on your stovetop, whatever. The thing with parchment paper, if you crumple it up first and then put it in your pan, it sticks a whole lot better than trying to like shove it down. So crumple it up. And now when you stick it in your Dutch oven, it'll actually like stay there instead of like popping out. So I shaped my dough.
Into a bag.
A bag?
A bag.
Why is that funny?
A bag.
All right, and now I'm gonna take a serrated knife, or if you have like one of the fancy bread cutting tools, you can use that. I just use I mean, I have both, but I just end up usually grabbing a serrated knife because it's right here. And then I'm gonna so I've preheated my oven to 425. I'm going to stick it in with the lid on for 22 minutes, and then I'll pull it out, take the lid off, and then it'll bake for another 42 minutes. Don't ask me where I got these exact numbers. I don't even think that's from the recipe. It's what I found that I like, just like how it's cooked. Some people cook it longer because they like the bread like crispier on the top, or like more like a burnt. Mine isn't. No one in my house likes that. And I can show you later, but if you take butter after you're done and you rub it on the top, it will soften the crust, so then the crust won't be so hard. And my boys and Caleb Pimples like that. So off to the oven.
Off to the different land.